Okay, sorry to keep you waiting. All right, so today we're going to finish up the discussion of Rashomon, and we're also going to get into motivation theory, which is the next chapter. There is no discussion board due this week. Um, so let me get rid of this. So basically, before we get started, though, I wanted to talk a little bit about current events. What happened in the economy and especially in the banking industry last week? Who knows? Someone?
Silicon,
SVB. Sorry.
Go ahead,
yep.
Yusuf. Go ahead, Yusuf.
Silicon Valley Bank just went belly up.
Very good. And why is that important?
I mean, I think it's self-explanatory.
Say
Um,
it again.
but no, I think it's self-explanatory.
Hmm.
But it's very important because Silicon Valley Bank was actually the lender and main bank for all of the businesses that are in Silicon Valley,
Hmm.
and a lot of money has been frozen right now. And over the weekend, there was lines all over the branches of people trying to get their money out, but weren't able to.
Okay. So basically, do you know what the insurance of bank failure is from the federal
FDIC.
government? Yusuf?
The You're talking about the FDIC?
Yeah, the FDIC. What is that?
It's pretty much like a consumer protection, in case something like this happens, where I believe it's up to $250,000. I'm
Yeah,
not.
I believe so too. So basically, if you're, most people don't have such big bank accounts as that, but if you're a company, like you're a tech company in the Silicon Valley and you've got a payroll of, say $5 million, then that could be lost. Okay, so anything above the 250, it's just like any investment, it could be lost. And so, these firms that a lot of their clients were companies, so there could be some losses there. But more importantly than that is that the bank failed because of Fed policy. So, what has the Fed been doing that actually caused the bank to fail? Anyone? Let's get someone else to do it. Anyone else want to take a shot at that? What has the Fed been doing? Okay, Hamdi, you want to tell us?
They've been increasing interest rates.
Very good. And why would that cause a bank to fail?
Less people are gonna be taking out loans.
Yes, but that wouldn't cause an immediate failure. I mean, there'd be less demand, maybe a restaurant slow on a Wednesday night or something, but that doesn't cause the restaurant to close. What would what would
There's
be?
going to be less. There's going to be less spending,
Yes,
right?
that's true too, but it's a more fundamental thing that, in other words, if they're holding reserves in the form of bonds, what does raising interest rates do to the value of the bonds?
The value of the bonds go down.
Yeah, so their reserves went down at the very time that the tech industry is having layoffs and their stocks are down. So they're not getting the deposits to cover the loss in reserves. So with the collapse of, with the rising interest rates, and it's important to understand, everyone should focus on this, that if you raise interest rates, that lowers bond prices and the prices of other securities. So as interest rates go up, bonds go down, and stocks go down with bonds. So this is now an important fatality from the Fed's raising interest rates. I'm not saying they shouldn't raise interest rates. I'm just saying that it's normal when the Fed raises interest rates significantly, and they're going through a major rate raising regime right now. It's normal for there to be a recession. That's quite common. Does anyone know the name of the bank that failed in 1931 that many people think set off the Great Depression of the 1930s? Anyone know that? It was the Bank of the United States, it was called. And it was based in New York. It was a New York City bank. And it folded just like Silicon Valley Bank, which is the 60th largest bank. And the Fed at that time in 31 failed to defend the bank at all. And one bank collapse led to others. And so the contraction of the banking system led to a severe contraction of credit, which in turn was probably the proximate cause of the Great Depression. And if you read the book Capitalism and Freedom, which is kind of a popular book that Milton Friedman wrote in the mid 60s, and it's also related to his longer and more scholarly book called A Monetary History of the United States. He argues that the Fed completely failed its mission in 1930, which was to defend the banking system. And the result was this prolonged depression, which was intensified because the government basically raised employment costs by instituting a host of employee government employment plans like unemployment insurance and Social Security. They adopted all this in the mid 1930s in response to the Depression, which, if you have high unemployment and then you raise labor costs, it's going to exacerbate the unemployment. The Fed at that time increased the money supply dramatically, and that was starting to have good effects. But in 37, they tightened again, and this caused a renewal of the depression. So it was by far the longest sustained downturn in the economy in history, and it was the worst. It was far worse. The depressions, when they talk about depressions in the 19th century, they were much, much milder than the Great Depression. There was never anything like 30% unemployment. I'm not saying we're going to get that here and now. That's highly unlikely, but what we could see is a slowdown for several years of the economy. And why is the Fed raising rates? Does anyone know that?
They normally do that so that the circulation of money can be reduced and it can then impact inflation.
Okay, inflation. The main thing, what they're worried about is inflation. I didn't show this to your preceding class, but I think I'll show it to you now. Fed St. Louis in one chart. So I showed this in my class yesterday. You know, if you look at the chart of, I'm putting on the screen share. If you look at the chart of M1, this is from the St. Louis Fed. You know, the money supply has increased steadily since World War II. I mean, this chart starts in 60. When I looked at this yesterday, I thought there would have been a downturn. Oh, there was a slight downturn. I see it now. So it went from 80, in 80, it went from 389 and to 384, I think. Yeah, it went from 388. So there was a brief downturn in the 80s, and this caused a huge surge in unemployment. And the problem back then in that period was similar to now, except the inflation was a lot worse and unemployment was a lot higher. So basically, this same thing happened back in 80, and Volcker stopped the inflation. He stopped the inflation by raising interest rates to a very high level. Now, what happened in the ensuing 43 years is that they increased the money supply steadily. And this has caused intermittent stock market bubbles and corrections. The big one was in 08 to 09 when there was at that time a strong increase in the money supply. You know, it goes up here to 1600. You know, it's like 30-40% increase in M1, and there was a much bigger increase in bank credit, went through the roof. But you know, and then in the ensuing 10 years, they had lots of monetary increase. So there's been massive increases in the money supply. But the big one was COVID. So basically, you're talking about Banana Republic type increase, you know, Rwanda or something. And so, or Argentina. And so basically, it shot up from 4 trillion to 16 trillion, and then continued to increase into 21 to you know, really peaked this year, surprisingly. Last year, I mean, we're in 23 now. So about a year ago, and the Fed didn't worry about the inflation that was occurring then. Now they've made this little correction here, this little reduction, which they do by they sell assets. So they're holding huge amounts of bonds and other things, and they sell it, and that takes cash out of the circulation. They retire the cash. So this slight increase, slight decrease, is what's causing all the pain. And what happened to all this money? It's arguably been brought into circulation around the world. In other words, lots of countries use dollars, and there are a lot of ways that the dollars can be absorbed globally. So this reduction now in this increase now in interest rates, reduction in the money supply, is leading to bank failures. Okay, now normally what would also be seen is declines in the stock market and subsequently a recession. And so this is going to affect the job market. You know, I think you should be aware of that. You know, and doing everything you can to get a job, the job that you want, because it's going to be hard later. Very likely. I don't know the future, but it seems likely. So on top of that, so changing the subject slightly, that there is going to be a career fair on March 30th, speaking about getting a job. And I highly recommend that everyone attend. That it's the career center is going to have a lot of employers, and I think one of the things I've been talking about is informational interviewing, and you can do an informational interview or two at the career fair. There'll be companies there, so you can talk to them, and that'll be a good way to network with prospective employers. And I'm told that there will be some excellent companies there, such as Goldman Sachs and other ones of equal stature. Okay, so that said, I will take attendance now. Farhad, Abdul,
Hello. I'm here.
hello, Farhad.
Hello.
Ahmed Alkor, Mohammed Athi,
Here, Professor.
hello, hello, Mohammed. Jenna Bell,
Here.
hello. Joseph Cananzaro,
Yeah, I'm here, Professor.
okay. Jiamin Chen,
I'm here.
hello. Janine Cola,
Here.
hello. Kermia Cyrus,
Here, Professor.
hello. David Esterovsky,
I'm here, Professor.
hello. Marimar Garcia,
Here.
hello. Monica Garcia, Alexia Harrigan,
Here. I'm here.
hello. Kani Zhang,
Here.
Yusuf Khan,
Yeah, I'm here, Professor.
hello. Georgie Kareem
Here.
Mishvili, hello.
Here.
Hello. Summer Lamb, Summer. Hangjan Lin,
Here.
hello. Hamdi Mali,
Here.
Ludley,
Here.
hello. Famida Patwari, Famida, Emmanuel Plamakis,
Here.
hello. Raquel, it's here.
Here.
Ji Shan Ruan, Brendan,
Hello, Professor. Here.
hello
Morning.
Brendan, how you doing? Aaliyah Todd,
I'm here, Professor.
hello Aaliyah. Stacy,
Hello, good morning.
good morning. Denasia,
Here.
hello. Jack Wu, Yeyin Zhang,
I'm here, Professor.
hello. Yixuan Zhang,
I'm here, Professor.
hello. Taryn Sander,
Good morning.
good morning. Christian Mendez, Janaya Pratt,
Here.
hello. Alexander Betts,
I am here.
yeah. Jack Shrem. Okay, I'm gonna call off the people who didn't answer. Alcor Garcia, Monica Garcia, Summer Lamb, Famida Patwari, Jishan Rawan, Jack Wu,
Here, Professor.
Jack is here.
Jack, okay. Yichuan Zhang, and Christian
I'm here,
Mendez.
Professor. You called me before.
Yikshawan?
Yes.
Oh, I wonder why I didn't have you. Is Matthew Zhao here?
Yes, Professor.
Okay, all right. All right, so here's Alcor. I'll give him credit. All right, so we didn't get last time to Rashomon, so why don't we discuss that for a few minutes before we get into the motivation stuff. Basically, who can tell me what selective perception is and how it plays out in the movie? Also self-serving bias and blaming the victim. How do all those play a role in the movie? Who wants to take a shot at that? How about Stacy?
Okay. Yeah, let me just give me 1 second. Okay. So what
Yeah.
I wrote was that in the film for self-serving bias, selective perception, outcome bias, that was able to be seen by self-serving bias is shown through all the witness account, especially the woodsman. And I put as he tries to portray himself in the best light possible, initially denying and keeping out information from the actual scene. And then I put that also could be considered selective perception since he leaves out credible information and kind of is like selective in what he decides to say. And then for outcome bias, I said that this could be identified throughout all the witnesses' accounts as they each have their own perceptions and biases when it comes to their recollection of what actually happened.
Very good. Excellent answer. Who wants to comment? Let's say you have a conflict in the workplace. You're a manager and you have two of your employees get into a conflict. Should you or would you believe one side story without hearing the other one?
No, you shouldn't. This is
Why
what
not?
help, Professor,
Why
because
not?
then it risk leaving a gap or a void of if something happens again, it only deepens whatever problem was not fixed initially. So it
Yeah.
should be full transparency to both sides.
Yeah. So basically, people are always going to tell you the information that benefits their you like
Agenda.
that benefits their side. And as a result, you need to talk to both sides in a conflict. That's always going to be true. And you have to take both sides seriously. If you're supervising employees and there's a conflict, you have to decide a number of things. Like, for instance, do you want to sit them down together and talk it out, or do you talk to each one separately? And there's sometimes advantages to one or the other, depending on the type of conflict also. And then you need to take it seriously. You need to, make both sides feel that you're concerned about their, their interests. And probably there's a famous book called Getting to Yes, and a lot of the subject of conflict and negotiation keys off it. And what they emphasize in that book is that most conflicts can be solved in a way that benefits both sides. So you can find ways to expand the pie rather than cut up the pie. And the trick in dealing with a conflict is to look for some kind of integrative solution, it's called. That integrative solution meaning that you integrate the interests of both sides so that you make both parties better off. This idea goes back more than a century to Mary Parker Follett was a progressive writer who talked about management a lot, and this idea of integrative bargaining came from her, and then it was carried forward in the labor relations literature in the 1950s and on. Basically then Fisher and Urey ran with it and turned it into like a book that's sort of a classic called Getting to Yes, and I recommend it. And the idea is that you want to look at the glass as half full, but you want to use that sort of positivity to look for options for mutual gain, that you want to expand the pie and be creative in resolving conflict. And so you want to overcome these kind of perceptual biases in dealing with any kind of conflict. So part of that is, of course, that you listen to both sides, but also that you encourage both sides to think in creative terms about how they can benefit from a creative solution. Okay, so I think your answers, this class gave very strong answers to the questions, and I appreciate a lot of the creativity. So, somebody said that the movie was actually about the end of Japanese fascism, which I found a fascinating thought. Yeah, and that's great if you can find these kind of creative things in a work of literature. That's exactly what it's all about. So basically today we are going to talk about motivation, and arguably it's the heart of OB. I mean, a lot of the stuff we've been talking about, like perception and emotions and personality, these kinds of topics, you might cover them in any psychology class, and they really don't tell you that much about how to manage directly. In the motivation stuff we're getting into, so this is chapters 7 and 8 in your textbook. We're getting into more like, what is it that managers actually do? And a big part of that is motivation. That motivation, meaning the processes that account for somebody becoming more intense, and the direction of their intensity and their persistence of effort toward attaining a goal. So you want to get people to focus and to work harder and to have a purpose. And a lot of this comes through motivation. And one of the things I want to talk about in connection to motivation is the movie 12 O'Clock High, which is about a lot of stuff, and we'll write about it later in the semester because it covers a number of the areas we're going to talk about. But basically, motivation is a big part of it. He's got to motivate these guys to focus on the flying and focus on the military effort and overcome their fear of death, which is a huge thing, and concentrate on teamwork and thinking of the group as a whole rather than their friendships and their feelings. And how do you motivate people in a context that's highly stressful and negative? And so I'm not saying anyone in this group, including me, will ever be in such an extreme context, but it helps to look at something like that to see what elements of it we can apply. And we'll talk about Fiedler's contingency theory next time, I think. But basically, Fiedler's contingency theory suggests that the two extremes, that if a circumstance is easy or if a circumstance is difficult, you're going to manage in a way that focuses on the task and you're not going to worry about people's feelings. Whereas if you are dealing with a circumstance that's moderately difficult, that's in the middle, then you are going to worry more about relationships. And business is normally moderately difficult. You worry about competition, you worry about beating the opponent. Even a circumstance like managing a sports team, it's stressful and there's a lot of competition, but there's not so much anxiety and such difficulty that you're going to have to be, you're going to be able to discard the personal relationships. Although in the film we're going to watch later, Moneyball, I think what happens is that he does have to cut off the relationships because the situation is difficult. And so he basically, when he finds that his coaches, when he finds that his coaches are not doing, when Brad Pitt finds that his coaches are not doing what he wants, he cuts them off, and he plays hardball with them to a degree. And this is because it's a difficult situation, and especially after they implement Jonah Hill's new policy, and the manager isn't cooperating, he's got to play hardball. So he transfers some of the better players out because the manager is using them to avoid doing what he wants, and he has to stop that. So basically, in a difficult situation, you focus on the task, and it's also true in a very easy situation. So if you work for, say, a government agency where there's a clear-cut task, it's easy to execute, there's not a lot of conflict, you do what you're supposed to do, the management can focus on the task, and we'll talk more about that. But the idea is that in the mid-range, you worry about the relationships. And I think the mistake a lot of business students make is that they don't think about relationships enough when they go to work, and they do think too much about the task. And so I was talking to my 3200 class yesterday, and several people said, oh, I think I work in a store, and the main thing that matters is getting things done, and it's cutthroat. And another guy said, yeah, you got to get results. And this is like the typical mistake that younger business people make when you get into especially when you get into the management ranks. But in any circumstance in business, you need to worry a lot about relationships. That's always really important, unless the circumstances are so bad that there's no time. That sometimes happens. So basically, we're going to talk about some theories that focus on needs, goals, and incentives. And your book talks about several different categories. First of all, there are classic theories of motivation, and there are also contemporary theories that include content, context, and process theories. I think the division of the classic theories into it's a separate category. I don't quite follow that. They kind of point out that some of these have not been held up by evidence, and that's especially true of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I'll talk about. But Hertzberg's two-factor theory and McClelland's need theory, well, they're not state-of-the-art theories. I think they're still relevant. They're they're not out of stock. I mean, there's reason to take them seriously. But before I get into that stuff, I want to talk a little bit about scientific management and also the human relations school, which are where all of this stuff came from. So basically, I just put on the whiteboard, and the idea of scientific management is basically, it comes from a guy named Taylor, and it's also called Taylorism. I'll just put that. Frederick Winslow Taylor lived in the late 19th century and early 20th century. He wrote in the late 19th century and early 20th century. I believe, I just looked up the date of death. I believe it's 1915. I'm just going to check that. It seems kind of early to me, 1915. Yeah, that's when he died. I thought it was later. And basically, Taylorism really shaped the way we think about management in general, and to an equal degree how we think about incentives and motivation. And so if you look at a book, there was a guy named Harry Braverman who wrote a book in the 1960s called Labor and Monopoly Capital. Monopoly Capital. He was a Marxist. And he had attended Brooklyn College, incidentally, for a year. And he argues in there that Taylorism is the real management. A lot of the other stuff that I'll talk about and that your book talks about is baloney. And he basically coined in that book the term de-skilling. And the idea of de-skilling is that management based on Taylor, but continuing on for the last century and plus, management wants to reduce the amount of skill required to do a given job, whether you work at Amazon or you work wherever, and they want to make the work as simple as possible so that they can control it. And so the argument is that the purpose of management is to take away any kind of autonomy from the worker so that they can pay them less. And basically it's based on the ideas of Taylor. I don't think Taylor saw his own ideas as being that sort of malevolent as Braverman kind of suggests. He did talk in terms of de-skilling, and he argued that the reason he favored de-skilling, he didn't use the word de-skilling, that came from Braverman, but the reason he favored de-skilling was that the employees were goofing off too much. He called it soldiering, that the employees were goofing off too much. And so you had to structure work so that they could be controlled, and so they'd optimize output. So he argued that there's one best way, the optimal way, same meaning. I'm just saying those two are the same expressions, and that the job of management is to find the one best way using time and motion study. The idea of time and motion study is that you break the work down into its simplest elements, and then have the workers perform the elements using all possible motions and all possible tools. And so you determine, based on your methodical study of alternative motions and tools, what's the most efficient way to do each behavior. And that then results in the one best way, the optimal way. And the way that you do that is that you hire first-class workers who are best equipped, and you find that by testing the workers. And you then observe the workers doing the alternative tools and motions in the time and motion study. You then arrive at the one best way, and then you train your employees how to do it the one best way. Okay. You set up a standard that the employees have to create a certain level of output to reach the standard. And then you use financial incentives or piece rates to motivate them. So Taylor was straightforward financial incentives. However, he said that fundamental to his system is that there needs to be a mental revolution between labor and management. And so both need to think in terms of maximizing profit. The workers maximize their bonus, the piece rates, which include a bonus. So I'll add that. Piece rates, including bonus. And the company wants to maximize profit. And so since they're both thinking in terms of maximizing output and becoming more productive, there needs to be a mental revolution so everyone thinks in those terms. Now, you might say, well, it's kind of old-fashioned that Taylor lived over 100 years, he died over 100 years ago. Braverman in the 60s argued that all management was based on Taylorism, and I think it's still true. And so basically, one way that your life is affected every day by Taylorism is that one of Taylor's associates in the 1930s was asked by the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching to study Columbia University and apply the principles of scientific management to universities so that they're efficiently run. And what the guy came up with was basically the way colleges are run now. So, basically what he said was the credit hour. You have a certain fixed number of credits per course, a certain number of courses to graduate. He came up with separation of teaching from administration. So you have your professor, and then if you have a registration issue, you go to the administration. And he talked about departmentalization. So you major in history or you major in English, and those are in different departments. So in other words, Taylorism was applied directly to colleges, and the way colleges are set up now is largely due to scientific management. And the same is true in most companies. There's some element of scientific management almost everywhere you go. And the thing is, though, Taylor's ideas were never implemented in full. Where they were often highly effective. In particular, there was a company called Lincoln Electric that, it still exists, that used Taylor's ideas extensively. And I was once talking about this in a class I was teaching, and a guy raised his hand and he said he had worked there. He had actually worked in Cleveland for Lincoln Electric. And he said he had to leave after a few weeks because he could not keep up with the pace. And the thing is, if you can keep up with the pace, you can make well into the six figures. All right. So in other words, in this blue collar work, you can make a very good income, largely based on a merit bonus that they get. And it's all based on scientific management. So the Lincoln Electric's been around for a very long time. They've never had trouble with global competition. They're the most efficient producer in the world, and they're able to do it with Taylorism. So you might say, why haven't other companies pursued this? And the reason is that, and Taylor talked about this, he was called to testify before the US Senate, and his testimony is available in books that you can easily obtain. And basically, what he says in there is that the employers objected when the workers started to become so efficient that they were able to surpass the standard rate and they would collect the bonus. So the way the bonus worked was that if you produced up to the standard rate, you would get a bonus, and then you would get an additional amount of piece rate for each unit past the bonus. So if you had $1 bonus, you produce the standard. Let's say you got $1 piece rate, the standard is 100. So you're paid $1 a piece up to the standard, so you get $100. When you hit the bonus, you get a $10 bonus, and then thereafter you get paid $1.10 for each additional unit. So basically, this would result maybe in they're making 20 or 30 or even more percent above the competitive rate. Now, this is actually what Taylor wanted. This is not a bad thing. It's what economists call efficiency wages. That because let's say each additional unit is worth 5 cents profit to the company, net of the profit of the piece rate. So if you pay the extra 10 cents to the employee and the company gets 5 cents, then both are better off. And so the company's making a hell of a lot more money because it's more productive, and the employees are making more money. And this is exactly what Taylor wanted. So the idea of efficiency wages that's taught in economics is that if you pay people more, they can become less costly, that you cut labor costs by increasing pay rates. And the way that you do that is by greatly increasing output through incentives. So if you pay someone $20 for 20 units and you pay them $30 for 40 units, the company has made more money, even as you've paid higher wages. So basically, what he says, though, was that the employers reacted in an irrational way to the increasing wages, and they would object to paying above the standard rate, even though they were making more money. And so they would raise the standard because they felt the employees had cheated them and they wanted more output before the employee got the bonus. Then the employees would quit, or they would withhold their effort from then on to work below the standard. And they would all do it in unison, so that the pace wouldn't be raised without their getting a reward. So basically, Taylorism was not generally applied in full. But if you look around corporate America, it's almost everywhere. And I think it's fair to say that it largely created the modern management approach that we have today. I'm not saying that's all we have, but he created, I think what Taylor's genius was that he created a lot of categories that we carried forward. And the reaction to Taylor in the 1930s, so this was after his death, was the Human Relations School. And the Human Relations School argued that that what mattered was group behavior, not individual behavior like in Taylor, but group behavior, and that money doesn't matter, but satisfaction does. And norms, group norms do. Okay, so this was first recognized by the a group of Harvard social scientists were doing a research study at the Hawthorne Electric Plant in Illinois, which was part of AT&T at that time. And they were looking at a lot of variables. They were using control groups. And one of the many variables they looked at was lighting. So they increased the lighting, and they noticed that productivity was going up strongly in reaction to the lighting. They didn't observe the same effect in the control group. They then reduced the lighting, and the productivity continued to go up. So they realized that it wasn't the lighting that was causing the productivity to go up, but rather the reaction of the participants to the study. So the test group felt that they were being specially treated and became highly motivated because of the attention they were getting. They felt happy. And they started to realize that one of the big factors that, and to them it was the chief factor that causes motivation, is morale. That, in other words, the happiness of the group, the satisfaction of the group, and the norms of the group that pressure each other to perform better. And so they argued in the human relations school that variables like group behavior does matter. And these guys, Roethlisberger and Dixon, wrote a famous book, Management and Morale. And the leader of the human relations school was one of their colleagues at Harvard named Elton Mayo. And Mayo absolutely disdained financial incentives. So there was this tradition in business schools that started that, money doesn't matter, and it continued to this day. It still exists, but I think by the 80s, certainly, people were becoming a little more sophisticated, and they realized that this job satisfaction matters, money doesn't matter argument really isn't that strong. There are still people who make that argument. We'll talk about them, like Alfie Kohn and Deci, the guy's name is. But basically, there's no reason why you can't combine financial incentives and also other kinds of motives like employee relations. Well, one of the classic theories that your book talks about is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and they're right that this theory has not been borne out by reality, but a lot of people talk about it. So basically, this idea is that there are 5 levels. Does anyone know Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Have you heard it before? Anyone? How
Could you
about,
repeat that, Professor?
have you heard about Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
No.
Anyone in the class take a shot at it? So, anyone? Kermia?
Professor,
Yeah, who's this? Raquel?
yeah, I don't want to seem like I'm cheating, but I just looked it up online, and it's
Okay.
psychological safety, belonging and love, esteem, cognitive,
Very good.
and aesthetic.
Good, Raquel. So basically, the 5 levels, and incidentally, Maslow also taught at Brooklyn College. Braverman attended Brooklyn College. Maslow taught at Brooklyn College for 13 years. And basically, he argued no, it's not that. It looks like this pyramid of a chain of command, but it's not. So the lowest order needs, according to Maslow, physiological needs like money and having a warm work environment. In other words, there's enough lighting or whatever, and there's enough. You're paid adequately, and the next one is safety, that you don't feel like you might get fired, that you have adequate benefits, stuff like that. And then the third level would be social or affiliation needs, love, as Raquel said. And the fourth level would be self-esteem. And then the highest level would be self-actualization. And basically, Maslow in self-actualization is basically keying off Aristotle, basically saying, Aristotle talked about teleological cause, and that one of the causes of things is their purpose. And basically what Maslow's saying is that people are motivated by self-fulfillment. Now, another guy, Oldorfer, created what's called the ERG theory, which simplifies Maslow. He talks about three. So the ERG theory, I'll just put it here, is existence. So that would be like safety and physiological. And then relatedness, which is the social, and then the growth needs, self-actualization and self-esteem. So he called it existence, relatedness, and growth. And studies done on Oldorfer's theory don't find that you have to satisfy lower order needs to achieve higher order needs, but rather the lower order needs have to involve severe deprivation before you can't work on the relatedness or the growth. So the existence needs, you have to be severely deprived. So in other words, you're starving to death, basically. Then it matters, otherwise no. So there are a lot of artists who, don't make money and they don't have a lot of friends, but they're focusing on their art. And this is perfectly common. And, like somebody like Eric Satie, the composer, I don't know if you ever heard his piano music, it's quite beautiful, but he was sort of a social isolate, and he died. No one even knew about the music, and they found it and they realized what he had done. But basically, you can be a great composer or a great artist, like Van Gogh, Van Gogh, was poor and he was crazy, and he cut his ear off and all this kind of thing, and yet still experiencing these growth needs and exploring the new kinds of painting and so on. So you see this all the time. And so basically Maslow's hierarchy of needs is not right, but it served as a motive for basically job redesign. And I would not say that a job redesign is unreliable. I mean, Hertzberg's theory has been superseded, but it was a good start to an important frame of thinking. And so Hertzberg's two-factor theory argues that there are two things. There are demotivators and there are motivators. And he, unlike the human relations school, he doesn't say that money doesn't matter. But like the human relations school, he says it's not a motivator. But he has disdain for the human relations school and scientific management. He says both of these were wrong. He's gonna he's the new sheriff in town who's gonna clean up the town. He wrote a famous article in, I think it was the early 60s. One more time, how do you motivate employees? By Hertzberg. I'm just looking for the year 1968. I was thinking it was the 50s. It's actually late 60s. And basically, what Hertzberg's theory is, in the article, he says that the existing theories of motivation are basically what he calls the jackass school of management, that you treat employees like you would treat a jackass, that you use the carrot and the stick. The carrot meaning incentives and the stick meaning punishment. And he said that the use of money as a motivator is not going to work. And he said that things that address the lower order needs in Maslow, so that would be the physiological, safety, and social needs, are demotivators. Whereas what motivates people is the higher order needs, self-esteem and self-actualization. So basically, there are two poles. Two poles. The motivators and the demotivators. And what he basically says is that the demotivators will demotivate you if you don't have enough of them. So if you're not paid enough, you're going to be demotivated. If you have an unsafe workplace, you're going to be demotivated. If you don't get along with your colleagues or your boss, you're going to be demotivated. In contrast, what motivates you is if you have interesting work. So if you're doing something challenging that you take pride in, then that's going to motivate you to be a high achiever. So basically, what he said is that employers need to pay adequately so that people are satisfied with their pay. But the way to get them to be really motivated is to redesign the work. This was followed through later by Hackman and Oldham in the job characteristics model, who also talked about redesigning the work. Now, Hertzberg focused on what he called vertical job loading. And the idea of vertical job loading is that you take stuff from the supervisor and you download it to the employee. So you cut out middle management, you eliminate middle management, and then give the challenging work to the rank and file. They'll find it more engaging and they'll work harder, and you don't need to pay middle managers. Okay, Hackman and Oldham, which we'll talk about later, elaborate on this and say that's one of the techniques, but there's some other alternatives, such as working on the whole task, restructuring work so people work on the whole task, opening up feedback channels so that people get feedback about their work from others, and creating autonomous teams. So that the teams, autonomous meaning self-directed, that the teams run themselves and they work on a whole task, they finish the task, they take pride in it. And so work redesign leads to higher motivation levels. Okay, now one last classic theory of management that I'll mention and that your book talks about is McClelland's need theory. And what McClelland argued is that there are certain needs that people have that drive most behavior. And this, in a way, you could argue that this is a throwback to what was called instinct theory in the early 20th century. So basically, this idea of instinct theory is that animals have instincts. For instance, birds fly south for the winter. Do they do that due to rational thought? Nobody really knows. I mean, how could you know that? But based on our observations about birds, that they're bird brains, that they don't have a lot of thought, but rather they don't think this through, but they just do it because birds have done this for eons and they've just developed a genetic or some kind of social predisposition to do this. And this becomes like an instinct. Now, the idea of instinct theory was criticized by many social scientists who argued that it's tautological, that you could say, well, if you say that birds fly south because they have a south flying instinct, what does that really mean? In other words, tautological means that the definition contains the word itself. Like you define blue, anything that you could say the color of anything that's blue. Okay, so obviously that's true, and you haven't really said anything, and that's what a tautological inference is, that A implies A. And the thing is that if you say that birds fly south because they have a south flying instinct, what you're really saying is that birds fly south because they fly south, and you're not really explaining anything. But early in the 20th century, psychologists and to a lesser degree economists were explaining, if you read Thorstein Veblen, he talks a lot about instinct theory, instincts. In fact, the title of one of his books is The Instinct of Workmanship, which is a great book, incidentally. But saying that people take value, and a lot of, incidentally, McClelland is related to this instinct of workmanship, this need for achievement. So basically, you could say are need theories guilty of tautological inference, and that argument has been made against McClelland, but I don't think it's that bad, because what McClelland tried to do, a guy named Murray had created this manifest needs theory, and he identified something like 16 needs or something like that, he argued explained a lot of behavior. And McClelland said, no, there are only 3 or 4 needs that can explain almost all behavior. So instead of like having a need for every behavior, McClelland saying that there are 4 basic needs that drive all behavior, or that are important to behavior. And these were the need for achievement, the need for affiliation. And you'll notice that the need theory here is similar to Maslow's, achievement being growth needs or self-esteem, affiliation being relationship needs. And he also talked about the need for autonomy, and the need for power. Okay, these second two were different from Maslow. And he didn't claim at all that there was any kind of hierarchy. In other words, you could have a lot of need for achievement. A guy like Bill Gates has a lot of need for achievement, but he also has a need for power. Okay, so, people can have multiple needs, and these needs can intersect, and you could have a lot of one need and a little bit of another one. There's no relationship among these. They're just independent causal things. Now, so what McClelland argued was that these 4 needs play a big role in management. And McClelland wrote a book, and I'll finish with this. We'll continue next time with the contemporary need theories. McClellan wrote a famous book called The Achieving Society. And in that book, he argued that the need for achievement is what explains economic success, that a nation becomes economically successful if it has a great deal of need for achievement. Now, what he also argued is that in large corporations, the need for achievement does not lead to success, but rather the need for power leads to success. So managers who are good at attaining power will be successful. And we'll talk more about power. We'll talk more about power in later classes. But the thing is that what McClellan is basically saying is that achievement is not how you succeed in the corporate world. Rather, achievement is characteristic of entrepreneurs. Okay, whereas the need for power is associated with corporate executives. And of course, politicians are associated with the need for power. So in my other class, a student was criticizing Jeff Bezos and saying that you can't be a billionaire without being dishonest. And I took issue with that. I think people who have a high need for achievement want to achieve legitimately. They don't care about the money. The multi-billion dollars is not why they do what they do. The reason they do what they do is to build something. And I think this is very alien to what most politicians want, because very, very few politicians have ever, some accomplish something and then go on to become politicians, but very, very few politicians can like say that they've built something or they've created something and this is their great achievement. There might be a few. One of them, incidentally, and I talk about in one of my other classes, is Robert Moses, who wasn't technically a politician, but who achieved a great deal in his career as a bureaucrat. He worked for government and achieved a great deal. But what McClellan says is that, you know, somebody like Robert Moses, who did build a lot and had a high need for power, Moses even more so, and was converted over his career from a need for achievement to a need for power. And so in the book, the famous book, The Power Broker by Robert Caro, is the biography of Robert Moses, who built a lot of New York City and New York State. And basically what Caro talks about is this transformation that Moses went through from achievement orientation to power orientation. Caro doesn't use those words, but that's basically what he describes in the book. Okay, so we're at 12:15, and we will continue next time, and we'll talk a little bit about the movie, and we've got a lot more stuff to talk about. I spent a lot of time on the early theories, and we need to talk about the content-based theories, self-determination theory, regulatory focus theory, job engagement theory, and also context-based theories like reinforcement theory, operant conditioning, behaviorism. There's also expectancy theory, goal-setting theory, self-efficacy theory, equity theory, and then we're going to get into the job characteristics model, which I mentioned last time, and talk a little bit about employee involvement, pay for performance, and a little bit about flexible benefits. That's a lot of material. So we'll see if we can manage it all in one session. So basically, see you next time. There's no discussion board due this week, and we'll see you on Wednesday. If you have any questions, stick around and I'll be glad to answer them.
Professor, I have a question. I missed the submission, the discussion board I think I emailed you. Is it okay
You
to
did,
just
so
submit what
yeah,
I've
you
done?
can,
Okay,
I'll let you do a make
okay.
comment.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Professor. Sorry I came late. Monica Garcia.
Yes, okay, Monica, I gotcha.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Anyone else have a question? Okay. If you do, contact me. Otherwise, have a good day.